On behalf of the planning teams of the Industrial Heartland and Cleveland Trails Summit, I'd like to welcome you to our second Thursday session, Cuyahoga Valley National Park, a national park for the community. I'm Andrea Ireland with the National Park Service Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program, and I will be your virtual room host. First, some important housekeeping items. This will be a 60-minute session followed by a 30-minute breakout session that you'll have to go to on a separate link. We are in webinar mode, so you are not able to be seen or heard as a participant. While the chat is not functioning, we will use it to push things out to you. And questions can be written in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded and will be available to see at iHeartTrails.org, as well as the Rails to Trails Conservancy's YouTube channel. CEUs are provided, and a link for that is in your chat. For CEUs, you must fill out a session survey, and a link to that evaluation or survey will be available in the chat as well. Directly after the session, there will be that 30-minute breakout session. And we urge you to join us for that. Some of the best conversation happens in those breakout sessions. So it has been nearly 50 years since the creation of what was then Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area. Back then, it was really out there, undiscovered and unappreciated. And it has taken decades, but now it is one of the most visited national parks in the system. And with outstanding recreational assets like the Cuyahoga River Water Trail and the Towpath Trail that connect to nearby communities, Cuyahoga is no longer a secret. And now there are new challenges. How has this popularity changed the visitor experience? And with visitors from not only close by, but as a destination location, how does Cuyahoga Valley National Park connect with local communities in mutually beneficial ways? In this session, we'll hear about how they're looking at the park and its connection to the communities. I'd like to introduce our session speakers. We have Jennie Vasarhelyi, who is Head of Interpretation, Education, and Visitor Services. Pam Barnes, who is the Community Engagement Supervisor and Public Information Officer, both at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And Rose Verbos, a Community Planner, Project Manager at Denver Service Center. So let's take it to Jennie. Thank you.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Andrea, and good morning, everyone. We are really pleased to be sharing about Cuyahoga Valley National Park at this joint conference for the Greater Cleveland Trails and Greenways and Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition. You know, what we're trying to do in this session is focus on the park's role as an anchor location within the region's interconnected park and trail system. So not seeing this park as an island, but seeing it deeply connected into the community. You know, trails create the physical links, partner relationship and programs, enhance these connections. This session will really focus a bit more on how we got to where we are today, but more importantly, it will focus on where we are going. As the park approaches its 50th anniversary, the National Park Service is seeking to deepen connections even further through a community access plan. You know, so the presenters today, we are kind of key people on the community access planning process. Again, I'm Jennie Vasarhelyi. I work for the Park Service at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. I am the lead for the community access plan for the park. I'm also the supervisor for our interpretation, education, and visitor services programs. And I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves, starting with Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Barnes. Like Andrea said, I'm the Community Engagement Supervisor and Public Information Officer. So I kind of straddle between supervising the staff that actually work with community groups and through our volunteer program, as well as public information and media relations with Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
And Rose.
Hey everyone, my name is Rose Burbis. I'm a community planner and project manager at the Denver Service Center. That is an organization within the National Park Service. I work in the planning division and we provide planning expertise and service to park units across the agency. And I get the good fortune of being able to be the project manager on the community access plan that we're working on at Cuyahoga Valley. So I'm excited to talk to you about that process today. And that'll be my role as a presenter.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And, we are really fortunate locally here at Cuyahoga to be able to tap into the national expertise. Since we are a federal agency and Denver Service Center is providing us just fabulous service on this project. You probably saw the learning objectives, but just to review them, we will go into some detail about the Federal Interagency Visitor Use Management Planning Framework. That's probably our closest thing to an acronym today. That is the planning methodology we are using for our community access plan. We are going into some detail in it because we think it's a very useful framework and that you might find knowing more about it relevant to your work. We hope you'll understand more about our robust civic engagement process and how that's benefiting the overall project. And then, some of it is really just appreciating that assumption that a park can embrace its role in an interconnected regional trail system rather than resist it and focus, have an inward focus on our work. This is really, about valuing that external community-centered focus to our work. What we're planning on doing for this presentation is a bit of an introduction to the park, since we know not everyone is familiar with it, and we hope the review will be helpful to those of you who do know it more. Again, describe our planning methodology, some of the specific, and then get into the specifics of our community access plan and civic engagement strategy. But what we're going to do is start with a little poll so that we better understand your interests. And I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and turn it to Rose to explain the poll and get you connected to it.
Yes, perfect. So there's lots of folks behind the scenes helping with this session. So we'll drop the link in to this Mentimeter poll. So if I could just get a thumbs up from Andrea that you can see the Mentimeter. Great, thumbs up. All right, so here's what we're interested in learning from y'all. We would love to hear about what you're most interested in for this session. There's 3 segments like Jennie had just laid out. There's a focus on the park background, planning process, and civic engagement. So if you would go to that link that's being dropped in the chat. Another way to access the poll is that you can see at the top of the screen, you can enter this into your browser and use the code to access the poll. And as soon as results start coming in, we'll see them populate here on the screen. So give everyone a few minutes to fill that out. And here we go, we've got some results coming in, pretty cool that we can see it real time. And what this is going to allow us to do today is to provide for some question and answer at the key sessions where you all are most interested, spend a little more time discussing those or go quicker on some of the other sessions, depending on everyone's interest. All right, looks like a close tie between the planning process and civic engagement. Oh, civic engagement's taking the lead. It's pretty fun that it updates real time. Thanks everyone for jumping in.
This is great. And why don't we switch back to the presentation, and I'll do the park background part, and I'll go a little bit faster so we have time for more of the other two pieces. So thank you for sharing your interests. So really this section is about how the park evolved into an anchor in an interconnected park and trail system. Whoop, no, I realized I didn't hit share all the way. There we go. Okay. So one is just to give you a sense of where we are. You know, our urban context as a river valley between Cleveland and Akron does mean that we have the opportunity to provide remarkable access for people on a frequent basis, even as much as daily. And this has been a long time coming. Well, it well predates the park. You know, the valley became defined as a place for outdoor experiences over the course of more than a century. As Cleveland and Akron industrialized after the Civil War, urban residents turned to the outskirts of the city for access to the outdoors. They used existing transportation systems to access it, for example, the Ohio and Erie Canal, the interurban line. You know, and of course, there's one of the questions, how do people know about the valley? How do they find ways to get here? Again, the canal. At the turn of the 1900s, the Plain Dealer featured beauty spots in the valley as places to come. And again, people used an interurban line to access the valley. Park development began in the 19 teens and 20s with the establishment of Cleveland and Summit Metro Parks. And part of the legacy of Cuyahoga Valley National Park today is that these parks, including the lovely Brecksville Reservation, are within the boundaries of the national park. Now, at that time, while there was the interurban lines and ways of accessing, there was also some difficulty around access. You know, early parks really were on the outskirts of the community and had difficulty for some people to access. So some access, maybe not as much as there could have been. People started thinking about a Cuyahoga Valley park around this time. The Olmsted brothers, that landscape architect firm that did a lot of planning, actually suggested creating a large-scale park in the Cuyahoga Valley in 1925. And then they said it was financially infeasible, so it didn't come to pass at that time. In addition to parks, we also start to see how people valued access to nature as an important part of child development. Numerous youth camps sprung up at the time. You know, I do want to put a little caveat around, things that were happening at that time, because there was a little anti-urbanism, a little negativity towards cities in that kind of progressive era work that was happening. Cities were seen as bad, nature was seen as good, and that label of bad was sometimes even applied to people coming from the cities. And, you know, as we're working in a world today of being more equitable and inclusive, you know, I think being aware of that past negativity that existed towards urban and may still linger in society is something really important to be aware of. Suburbanization after World War II accelerated momentum towards creating Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And we need to acknowledge that suburbanization was tied to changes in the city. You know, it was white flight, for example. It was disinvestment in the cities and investment in suburbs. What we saw happening is that investment in suburbs, you know, threatened natural places, and there was kind of a grassroots movement trying to protect the nature in the countryside of the cities. And that's what that lovely historic photo is, of a tour of the valley organized by citizens trying to protect it as a large-scale park as that idea reemerged in the 1960s. And it was that combination of great political support from leaders like Ralph Regula, who is on the left, and John Seiberling in the center, bipartisan congressional support that made it happen. The valley was created in 1974 as a national recreation area. And then, you know, this must be on a timer. So I'm sorry that I'm gonna have to flip back and forth. And then became Cuyahoga Valley National Park in 2000. Can someone go into our program, Rose or Pam, and see if you can turn off the timer as I keep going? I do want to point out our park purpose. That's in our legislation. It describes what we do, and 2 slides. This first part of it is a very kind of classic national park purpose. You know, we're here to preserve and protect for use and enjoyment natural, historic, and scenic resource values. The second part of our purpose is more really about what makes Cuyahoga Valley National Park special, that emphasis on needed recreational open space necessary for the urban environment, for example. As the park developed, we started to see the creation of these linear experiences that run north-south through the park. They include Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad and the Towpath Trail. And while they started in the park, people saw the potential to extend them beyond. Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad very quickly went into Akron, and you started to see real interest in the Towpath Trail being extended into Cleveland and Akron and further south. And that interest became realized through the creation of a national heritage area in 1996, the Ohio and Erie Canalway. And it was the Canalway that really stimulated the development of these linear park connections in Cleveland and Akron and beyond. Yesterday, we got to celebrate the opening of the Towpath Trail, fully completed in Cleveland, and people at that opening were really emphasizing the connection to the park. So the heritage area creates that wonderful connection to the park, and now there's a real emphasis on creating community connector trails. Hemlock Trail, for example, is one of the most recent ones. And then the Cuyahoga River Water Trail, you know, runs the length of the river, also further connects us to the community, and it represents the shift of the Cuyahoga River from an industrial to a recreational river, and creates a new kind of defining feature and sensibility for the region. Again, as I mentioned, community programs are also how we make those connections. We have the physical connections. We do extensive education and community programs to create opportunities. And then, so where we are now is we do have lots of emerging issues tied to the popularity of the park. You know, it's not a coincidence that this is first on the list, because for the Park Service, these really take up a lot of our time, but we also have the 50th anniversary of our park. Having our embedment in the community is part of our DNA. Our high profile in the community, our interest in equity and inclusion as really something that led us to this community access planning process to move us into a more mature phase of the park that will help us refine many aspects of how visitors access and experience the park. This is a major planning effort that visitors in the community we'll see implemented on the ground in many different ways in the years to come. So I'm going to switch now to Rose to share the planning process.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. We're really excited that the Community Access Plan is following the Visitor Use Management Framework that the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council put forward. We are going to drop this link that's on your slide into the chat. It is a publicly available website with all the resources for the framework, and I'll talk a little bit more about that council, how they were formed, and the need in just a little bit. We wanted to just throw this up here to say this is the process we're using, and we're going to talk about this in more detail in the future slides. So we can go to the next one. You know, why did we select this process to use? There's a couple advantages that this really is focusing on maximizing those benefits for the public and considering maintaining and achieving desired conditions for resources and visitor experiences. Through the visitor use management planning process, we're also able to consider the relationship between park visitors and local community, a really big emphasis for Cuyahoga. And what we're really talking about when we say visitor use management planning is this dynamic process of planning for and managing characteristics of visitor use. Those include the setting, and we accomplish that through a variety of settings and variety of strategies and tools. Those can be anything from education, site management, regulation, enforcement, allocation, all of that within the real focus of achieving and maintaining those desired conditions. What we know and what you all know so well because of the work that you do and your expertise is that visiting a park, an open space, a protected area is really a mechanism for people to connect with their natural and cultural heritage, pursue healthy lifestyles, as well as just interact and have social experiences, spend time with family and friends, contribute to the economic vitality of the community, and be inspired when they have these experiences. We really want to enhance that experience and connect it with the improvement of resources, which is why that visitor use management planning is such a critical process. We can go to the next slide. We like to make sure that when we're talking about this framework and the process that we're really clear on the definitions and how we're referring to these concepts. When we think about visitor use, we're thinking about the human presence in an area for recreation purposes. That could include education, interpretation, inspiration, physical and mental health, many of those opportunities that visitors are having. The experience itself is the perceptions, feelings, and reactions that a visitor has before, during, and after a visit to an area. So those are important concepts to keep in mind. So what does visitor use management help us do? From the National Park Service perspective, we think about this in a variety of beneficial ways that can help us enhance opportunities to connect visitors to the park's fundamental resources and values, the reason that the park was established. We have the opportunity to assess the appropriateness of new activities, aligning public expectations with visitor opportunities. What can our visitors expect when they're coming to these units? And every unit is unique, so those expectations should vary across their opportunities for visiting. Minimizing impacts to resources, managing visitor demand at popular destinations. Jenny said there's a lot of time and effort spent on some of those challenges of congestion and crowding. That's certainly happening at Cuyahoga and not unique across the agency. We have the opportunity to manage that in a way that still provides that opportunity. And balancing trade-offs between visitor use management strategies. So who is the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council? It's a council comprised of the 6 federal land and water management agencies. That includes the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, Army Corps of Engineers, and NOAA is included as well. I'm forgetting one on my list. Let's see, which image did I forget here? Bureau of Land Management. So those are the agencies that are a part of this. The council was originally formed so that the federal agencies working on visitor use management challenges would have consistent language and process to be able to collaborate together. We often know that visitors don't know those boundaries, and we share boundaries with a variety of jurisdictions, not just federal, but local and state municipalities, as well as our open space partners too. So having this process really helps us to speak the same language. The Interagency Council has developed a position paper. The early products were the position paper on visitor use management and visitor capacity, which we have legal requirements for, and then the visitor use management framework. That's the process that we're using in the Cuyahoga Community Access Plan, and we'll talk through that in detail today. Other products that you'll find on the council's website include monitoring guidelines, a visitor capacity guidebook. The group is currently working on a desired conditions guidebook, and online training modules that will be available for folks who are interested in getting some more in-depth information on how to apply this framework to their setting. So here's the overview. It's the 4-step process: the build the foundation, define visitor use management direction, identify management strategies, implement, monitor, evaluate, and adjust. And central to this process is law, agency policy, the sliding scale, and public involvement. One of the new components of this framework that was not a piece of previous federal agency frameworks, some of you might be familiar with the National Park Service's Visitor Experience and Resource Protection, as well as the Forest Service has an indicators and standards approach that was previously used. Limits of acceptable change was another framework. The sliding scale is a new element, and it's important because it allows us to align and ensure the investment of time, money, and other resources for a project is commensurate with the complexity of the project and the consequences of the decision. So you can see the 4 criteria are listed here. And we like these images because they provide examples of projects that could be considered low end sliding scale and higher end. So you're thinking about the risk to the impact risk, the issue uncertainty, how involved are your stakeholders, what's the potential for litigation or the level of controversy, and moving those criteria up and down on the scale so that you can align that time, money, and resources into the project. The main takeaway from this slide is that the process doesn't change, but the amount of time that you spend in the process steps might change depending on how complex, how high your potential for litigation controversy, your issues are on the project. The first element that we'll talk through is this building the foundation, and we can go to the next slide. The pieces of this include clarifying the project purpose and need. Often at the onset is where you're thinking through what is the real need for this project, reviewing the area purpose and applicable legislation, thinking through agency policies that apply, and other management direction, including prior planning and guidance that exists. Most of all NPS units have a foundation document, so that's typically included in this step as well. Assessing and summarizing existing information and current conditions. And this element wraps up with developing a project action plan. What's next? What are you going to do? How are you going to take this process on? Element 2, defining visitor use management direction. You can go to the next slide, focuses on those desired conditions. So we will get into a little detail on desired conditions. Also defining appropriate visitor activities, facilities, and services that align with the desired condition, and selecting indicators and establishing thresholds. Visitor use management direction might be developed as a part of a programmatic document or more fully developed as a part of a plan, which we're doing at the Cuyahoga Community Access Project. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more detail. What do we mean when we say desired conditions? Desired conditions are really intended to paint a picture of the character, condition, and quality of the park setting. These do not describe how the desired conditions will be achieved, but they describe the vision for what you are trying to achieve. You can see on the slide 3 examples of 3 different locations that vary in their setting type that would each have different desired conditions associated with them. So if you're thinking about a group camping experience, that photo is at Yosemite. That's a social environment. You're fairly close to others. The photo in the center is of a lodge. There are specific desired conditions and the facilities align with the experience visitors are having when they stay overnight at a lodge at a national park unit. And then you can see the bottom left photo is at Gates of the Arctic, a backcountry camping experience, very different desired condition than you have in the other 2 photos. So while desired conditions allow us to identify that vision for the area for our resources and our experiences, indicators and thresholds ensure that we're monitoring to ensure that we're achieving those conditions. When we think about indicators, we're translating our desired conditions into measurable attributes that can be tracked over time, and thresholds identify the minimally acceptable condition associated with each indicator. So then you have your vision, you have your monitoring, and you're able to see, you take management action and see if that makes a change. Does it help you come closer to achieving those desired conditions? Do you need to take more action? That's what monitoring really helps us focus on. In the next element, you're identifying management strategies. This helps to focus on comparing and documenting the difference between the existing conditions, the desired conditions, and ask that question, are you achieving your desired conditions? Many times, and sometimes, and many times, for visitor experience in crowded and congested areas, we might say, well, yeah, there's this experience that the visitor wants to have here can't be achieved. And what actions do we need to take to allow the visitor to have that experience? And so identifying those actions and strategies that help to achieve the desired condition. This is also the element where for the National Park Service, we have legal requirements around the identification of visitor capacity. And that also includes strategies to help us manage to that capacity. If we just have a capacity without any strategies, it's also not going to help us achieve the desired conditions for that area. And developing a monitoring strategy as a part of this. So the capacities and the strategies associated with those become a part of the total package of monitoring for the desired conditions. We like to just emphasize that, and you all know this as professionals and those working in the field, there's a variety of strategy categories that you can think about. And we like to think about those from education, engineering, and enforcement categories. Where we're thinking about engineering might be site management, where we're selecting resistant sites or using physical barriers to prevent additional social trailing from occurring, closing areas or facilities as needed for restoration, increasing the size of your boat launches or separating commercial and non-commercial use in areas. All of that consideration and alignment with your desired conditions. We're using education to ensure our visitors and we are promoting those low impact practices such as leave no trace. And then regulation and enforcement, just making sure that what we set out and the ways that we hope people will come and behave are the ways that they are. And sometimes that requires a little bit more enforcement. So I mentioned visitor capacity briefly, just want to talk a little bit more about this piece of the process. So what we're doing when we're thinking about visitor capacity, the definition of this is the maximum amounts and types of use that an area can accommodate while sustaining desired resource conditions and visitor experiences that are consistent with the purposes for which the area was established. So when there is a process within a process to identify visitor capacity, and it is important to note here that it is step 10 for a reason. Capacity is a tool that is a part of the larger visitor use management process, and it is not a direct visitor use management plan or process itself. That really the capacity requires us to first think through all of these other pieces, such as changes to river access or expansion of amenities at trailheads. All of that impacts the maximum amounts and types of use that can be accommodated in an area. So thinking through everything, we really like to think about the capacity as a subcomponent of visitor use management. And then element 4, implement, monitor, evaluate, and adjust. So once you've put your monitoring protocols in place, how are you ensuring that this is happening? Lots of times we know we take one action, we're monitoring, it's not helping us achieve what we want to do. We need to take more action. We keep monitoring, we make adjustments as we go. That's what this element is all about. And that is to say that this is a really iterative process. I think what I would want folks to take away is that it seems linear. It seems like it can take a while to go through the 14 steps, but this can also be done in a very rapid context as well. And for the Cuyahoga plan, I think Pam's going to talk us through some of the specific ways we are using the process to work through and think through the opportunities and challenges that the park has with visitor use.
Great, thank you, Rose. And I think based on time, if there's 1 or 2 questions specifically about the framework, we could pause for a moment and take those. I don't know if someone's monitoring the Q&A.
Yes, we are monitoring the Q&A, and at this point, there are no questions.
All right,
We encourage everybody to put questions in there.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. And let's, so put your questions, we'll get to them at the end, and we'll switch to Pam and to describe what we're doing at the park.
Great, thanks. I would say that means Rose did an awesome job then, if there weren't any questions. So I want to switch us back to what does this mean for Cuyahoga Valley National Park? And how are we applying this framework that Rose described, considering the history that Jennie described? How are we taking this into our planning process? One of the things we did early on is we changed the name from visitor use management to community access. And that was based on some of the comments that we received early on. People saying like, I'm a visitor, why do I need to be managed? And so we thought it was more inclusive to use the name Community Access Plan. And of course, we did apply a acronym to that. So on the next slide, what we did first early in that process was we did some internal scoping. We had some meetings with park and partner staff, and we discussed these issues that were kind of swirling, we already knew existed. And what this preliminary process helped us do is to find some themes and be able to articulate and talk about what our issues and opportunities were. And it also helped us determine the need for this further planning and to embark on this process. So what we found were some key issues that were no surprise to anyone who's been around Cuyahoga and watched this evolution as we grew, kind of grew into a more mature unit of the national park system. Excuse me. And so here are some of the issues that we found. There's a lot of people that wanted to visit Cuyahoga. In 2016, the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, the national parks invited people across the nation to find your park. And boy, did they find their park. They came to visit Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And then you layer a pandemic on top of that, and you get these issues of crowding and impacts to resources. We are really super happy to welcome new visitors, people that are new to Cuyahoga Valley, people that are new to national parks, but yet these experiences over the last few years have really shown us that we need to do some planning to improve the experience for the people who want to visit their national park. So we didn't only want to focus on issues, we also wanted to use this process to think about what opportunities are presented to us to make this plan take the park into the future. And we really want to listen to the community and include their input in the process. So you'll see later, I'll talk a little bit more about the camping issue or opportunity, how we want to think about engaging our communities and having real relationships with them. So on the next slide, this gets us into how did we use a civic engagement process that was robust to get ourselves into this. We got our ducks in a row. We're ready to get into this visitor use management process. And what it helped us do is to get out of our own heads. And on the next slide, we really thought about how do we use some best practices in civic engagement? How do we, and I've heard other people that are probably on this call today talk about planning not for the community, but with the community. How do we invite people to have an equal chair at the table and that their voice is equally heard in this process? And we do need this to be a strong part of the process because we want the community voice to be part of our decisions. So what are our goals for engaging in this process? We wanted to step back and say, well, why are we doing this? What's the end game? So part of that end game is relationships, about keeping relationships that we have. Who do we want to strengthen relationships with? Who should we be working with that we're not currently working with? And how do we continue conversations beyond this process? So that's what I'm excited about too, is we brought people to the table. It wasn't a one-time thing. We're going to keep the conversation going. So how did we do this? How did we make sure that different voices are going to be heard? We used a variety of tools. So we had online meetings. We recruited people specifically to come to these online meetings. And then we had 2 meetings that were open to the general public. And we had a formal comment period. And you'll see, I'll talk a little bit more about that comment period and how it was robust. I think because we already have a community of people that are passionate about the park, we cast a wide net in inviting these comments. And the last bullet point there, the Denver Service Center did a really great job in creating a story map, which was a map-based presentation that just gave the information in a different way, in an interactive and visual way, different way to make people think about the issues and opportunities. So we held 10 different meetings, and the reason why we wanted to have this many meetings was to be really intentional about bringing these different voices to the table. And internally, we talked about this. It took a lot of time, but we really valued putting that time into doing this many meetings, and really valued the level of conversation that we had in each one of these meetings. The results of the meetings: we had 340 people attended, and the number of 1,000 substantive comments was really significant. So a lot of times you'll put out something for public comment, and you may get a few people that engage, but by having this robust series of meetings, it brought these more substantive comments. And something else that was it's going to be proved to be really useful is 40 pages of notes that framed and described the discussions that we had in these meetings. And all of this information is going to be used to help us move further in this framework by drafting desired conditions, thinking about zoning in the park, and thinking about what our actions and strategies are going to be. So like I said before, oh, did I miss that slide? Okay, this was the themes that came out from taking a look at those comments and analyzing them. One of the greatest things about being able to work with Denver Service Center was having a contractor that looked through and poured through all of these comments and the notes and came back to us with what these key themes were. And you'll see first on the list, a high interest in camping. And I'm not going to read through the rest of them, but I think what this slide does is it helps us understand taking the time to analyze and find some thematic way to use the comments to help us move forward. So after we took a look at these themes, we had the meetings, we started analyzing. We said, well, what are our next steps? We're not done because we did one round of civic engagement. Over the summer, what we're going to do is continue this engagement. We have in the interpretive division in the park a tool called a pop-up, and it's just a little table with information and some ways to interact with visitors to promote conversation. And so we're going to continue these conversations, and that will help us get to the next step. So as we are continuing in this conversation, we also wanted to look back and think about what were the lessons learned for moving forward for future civic engagement. We're going to have more rounds of this. So here are some things that we learned through this round. We were kind of forced into the virtual environment, but we learned a lot. I think all of you have learned how we can engage people in this virtual environment. We were able to engage people that might not have physically come to a public meeting, but they could click on a virtual meeting in the middle of their busy day. We learned about having our conversation based on the audience. An example was one of our community conversations ended up to be a smaller group than we thought it was going to be. And we pivoted from having breakout groups to just having one big conversation and having everybody introduce themselves. And it was a really nice, fruitful conversation because we were able as a team to pivot. And in the same vein is having those backup plans. And the last bullet point there, I'll talk specifically about Cuyahoga Valley National Park, is putting in the time ahead of time. What we're talking about here is Cuyahoga has for many years been focusing on engaging communities through activities and through programs, through working with community members and community leaders. So many of the people that were invited to the table already had a relationship with us, or we had a relationship with the organization. So I could see that was fruitful in putting the time in to those relationships before inviting someone to the table to be part of a conversation. So what's next? How do we apply what we've learned? So this little diagram talks about our planning process. So you see we finished the kickoff in this spring. We're going to take a look at our strategies in the summer. We're going to continue this public involvement into the fall. And then in the winter and into 2022, we'll be ready to have a draft plan. We'll take it back out to the public again to say, how did we do? How did we do in incorporating your comments and your vision for some desired experiences and facilities and what the park looks like? And finally, where are we headed into the future? This community access plan is, if you think about it, it's part of the evolution of Cuyahoga Valley. We're a fairly new national park. We're going to turn 50. We're not really a destination park in itself, but we're part of the community, and we want to see ourselves as part of the community moving into the future. And I really think that was demonstrated yesterday in that that ribbon cutting for the towpath is what we are striving for in the future. We are in the top 10 visited national parks in the country, and we would like to be a park that provides better access and serves a variety of visitors that represents the American people. So with that, I am going to turn it back to our facilitators and we do have a little bit of time for some question and answer if we do have any questions.
Thank you, Pam. Yes, we do have some questions. It's very exciting to hear about the process and the fact that the park is looking outside of its boundaries to new user groups, existing user groups, and how to work together as regional assets to build upon the great success that that not only the park has had, but the communities around the park that are realizing success because of the park as well. So one of the questions was from Amy Camp at Cycle Forward. She loves the change from visitor use management to community involvement, or whatever the wording was. And she wonders if other national parks are doing the same. Is Denver Service Center considering changing visitor use management to visitor access planning?
Well, so naming plans is always a thing that we talk about. I think really specifically at Cuyahoga, the focus is on the community access. I think Pam really articulated it well about being integrated with the community. I wouldn't say affirmatively yes or no. I don't, the interagency visitor use management framework just came out in 2016. All of that guidance is based on that terminology, including upcoming trainings and guidebooks. However, when the Park Service applies that thinking, we apply it specific to each unit. So we have visitor use management components in all sorts of plans, in trail rehabilitation plans that I'm working on at the Smokies, in a transportation study, an EA at Vicksburg, at, let's see, Acadia National Park, it was also part of a transportation plan. At Buffalo National River, they're integrating it into a comprehensive river access and management plan. So all over the place. So what we call the project is really focused on the issues at large, right? Like not just that visitor use management can be a part of all of those, I guess. That's the best answer.
Right. I do think that the visitor access plan is much more user-friendly for Cuyahoga. Another question was, what groups were new to the planning process? Any usual suspects? How did you go about identifying partners that maybe hadn't been involved before or that you wanted to be involved more?
Pam, I can start the answering and you can finish that. I mean, I that's a great question. And I think is one of the fundamental dilemmas is it's easier to talk to people that you know than people that you don't know. You know, this is not our first really strong visitor input. We just completed a visitor center project where we really built a network of people to provide input. In that one, we actually hired some community members to recruit individual stakeholders to participate, and I could see something like that happening in future phases of the work. We did really do I guess assertive, I don't like the word aggressive, you know, outreach campaign to partners. And we leveraged relationships that are being cultivated at all levels of the staff. So I think one of the places where we did have some really nice new participation was thanks to a staff member who's really cultivated relationships with organizations that serve people with disabilities. And having their voice at the table in the community access plan was really great. And I think we heard things that we had never heard before. Kind of another example of something that we did is, you know, taking advantage of opportunities to network. There is someone working on a LGBTQ plus community assessment for Summit County. And they had a Parks and Leisure team to help inform that community assessment. I joined that team, to expand my network within the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that led us to some feedback that we hadn't heard before. Pam, anything you want to add there?
Well, I was going to mention the disability community. I think we learned a lot there. And we also invited the stakeholders that we had to invite someone else that they knew. And I'm hoping that that will, in the next round of public comment, that we can expand a little bit further. And we also invited representatives from communities that are in the national park and around the national park. And one of the things we heard was we were talking to community leaders and how can we get to better talk to community members, which I really took that one to heart.
I'll just add one more. I think by making these intentional asks, and I think the virtual environment also help people be more quick to say yes because they didn't have travel time involved. So another place where I was really pleased with the turnout was organizations representing transportation. So both of the RTAs in the region, the regional transit authorities, the transportation planning agencies participated, and that's not something we always see. And we were extremely pleased and had extremely helpful input and feedback.
We have just a couple minutes left, maybe one more question here. You mentioned that Cuyahoga Valley National Park is not a destination park, although in my comments, I said that I thought it was a destination park, at least not right now. Is this something the park is looking at shifting towards in the future? Or if the park is intentionally shifting towards that in the future? Kind of already happening.
Well, I just wanted, I might editorialize a little bit on why I phrased it that way, and then I'll let Jennie jump in too. Is a lot of the comments that I hear is that we have the name National Park, and people think of Yellowstone and Yosemite and Grand Canyon and extraordinary natural features when they think of national parks. And we've talked about ourselves as what a national park could be, and how we tell that national story of the environmental movement and have national significance in the transportation story. So I was more thinking of it as people will travel across the country to have a destination visit to Yellowstone. And Cuyahoga is a different kind of a park. And that's a good question. I think we do want to be a destination, but we need to have our planning in place to be ready for it.
And I would just add is since our name has changed, we do see more out of town visitors. We've done 2 comprehensive visitor surveys, one in 2005, 9% of our visitation was from out of state. In 2015, our name change had been around for a while, and 20% of our visitation was from out of state. I think it's growing, and I think it's really important. I think we have something to offer the country being this national park in a metropolitan area. So, I really like elevating our story so that people, when they come here, really see this as a worthy national destination. And we're seeing national interest, being the #1 urban kayaking destination in the country through recent designation, I think is an example of how our national profile will elevate.
Yes, and great resources like the Cuyahoga River Water Trail help to do that. We're going to be going into the breakout session, and Yvonne did include the link to that. I encourage you to grab the link from the chat to take it so you can get into the breakout session, because as soon as we're done here, this will disappear, and then you'll have to go searching for your link. I wanted to thank Pam, Jenny, and Rose for this presentation. It's been really informative and a new way, perhaps a deeper way of looking at how to interact with your communities, how to be more relevant, and I'm looking forward to the discussion in the breakout sessions. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and I remind you to please grab the link for the survey that's in the chat. You'll have a few minutes before the breakout gets going. You could even finish that survey right now. Let's see, the other sessions will be tomorrow. The next session will be tomorrow if you're not going on site visits locally today. And we ask you to join us in the morning to hear an update from ODOT, Ohio Department of Transportation, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and our finishing session, which is about trail access for all. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and please join us in the breakout session.